Good morning, everyone, and welcome again to Word of Faith Response. This is Mark Morris with Word of Faith Fellowship, and we're so glad that you joined us this morning. We have so enjoyed sharing with you so many wonderful things about what God has done in our lives, and this program has meant so much to us because it's just so good to be able to tell what Jesus has done. You know, the Bible is full of accounts of people who served God and God blessed them, and we read about it in the Bible, and you know, it's one thing when as you read about it, and then it's a whole nother thing when it happens to your life, and you just can't help but share about what Jesus has done in your life. And so today I have actually Phil and Sherry with me to share with you what God has done in their lives. They have been at our church for many years. They came from Wilmington, and originally they came from other states, and you'll hear all about it, how God brought them here. You also hear an amazing testimony of how God saved their marriage, and in part of what you're going to hear at some point this morning is how they were actually in divorce court, and God came to them and restored their marriage, and now they have a wonderful marriage and they love each other, and you're going to hear about that miracle. You may remember, if you were listening on some past programs, that we had Sherry's sister on the program. Her name was Kathy, and she came from Wilmington, and she shared her testimony. And what's interesting is that actually Kathy and Sherry were separated when they were little children, and their parents went through some struggles, and they were separated, and actually were not really reunited until they were adults. They both had two completely different paths, but somehow when they became adults they ended up reunited, and they're both here in Spindale serving God together, and they're at the Word of Faith Fellowship. So we'll hear some of that too. So I would like to turn it over. I'm going to turn over to Sherry first. Sherry, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jim. As Mark said, that when I was real little, my parents divorced. My mom was 19, had 3 children, and that's quite a bit. That's a load for people to even be able to do one, much less 3. So us girls were separated. My oldest sister went with my biological father's parents, and my middle sister and I, we went to, for lack of a better word, a foster home. The first foster home wasn't so swell. They found out we didn't have any clothes, we didn't have any food. So God came and rescued us and put us in another home. And at that point, that home was where God came again, and he showed us the love of God, and he taught us that there is a God. Where before, you know, as little ones, you know that there's something out there, but you don't know it unless it becomes evident. And from that point on, we lived with them and went to church and was disciplined and loved and fed and clothed. And my grandparents would come and get us and visit with us, and we would go with them and visit with them. We did that till I was about 8, and then my mom remarried, and then my middle sister, Dee Dee, and we went and lived with them. Kathy ended up staying with my biological father's parents because that's pretty much where she had been for several years. And we did not go to church when we went with my parents. So it was pretty much no church. If we wanted to go to church, we would go with the neighbors. But after a while, you know, we just lost that zeal to go to church, even though we still knew there was a God. After high school, I ended up moving with my parents to Atlanta, Georgia, and my mom thought that I needed a friend. So there was a setup. So we went over to our friend's house that we'd known for our whole lives. Their mom took my mom to the hospital so I could be born. Mm-hmm. And so we met over there, and lo and behold, Phil was there. And I didn't think too much about him. But the next day when I was talking to my middle sister, she said, "What did you do?" I said, well, I met my husband. She said, no, you did not. I said, yes, I did. I met my husband. No. Yes. So as time goes on, 3 months later, he decides he's going to call. And I said, well, what took you so long, you know? So we all got together with my friends and Phil, and we all went out and had a good time for several months. And then he decided he wanted to ask me to marry him, and I said, sure thing.
Let me just a little bit. I was when we met. It was God that was in my life that moved me from where I was at. I was on my way to. I was a heavy equipment mechanic, and I was on my way to Alaska to work on the pipeline to make lots of money. But God changed the weather. The coldest weather Indiana had seen in many, many, many years. And since I grew up in Florida, I wanted to go back south. God moved me to Atlanta. And so it was God that Sherry and I were in the same town and that we met finally. And
Had your parents known each other? You were sharing with us before. There was some kind of connection there. How did that happen?
These friends were my neighbors.
Okay.
They had the hurricane had run them out of the subdivision where they met Sherry's parents, and they became our neighbors. And after Sherry was born, her mother came over to our friends and said, "Oh, look at our new baby girl." I'm 8 or 9 years old, and I said, "Oh, babies," And I would always have to go home because they had company. Her mom and her sisters were there, and I hated because I couldn't play with my friends because Sherry and her mother showed up. I didn't know it was Sherry.
So you actually in Florida saw Sherry, your wife, as a baby, and then here you are in Atlanta. Or is that right, Georgia? And years later, you're an adult. She just gets out of high school, and somehow you hook up again.
Yes.
And you ask her to marry you.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes. Go ahead.
That was God.
Was Charlie gone? We moved to Colorado, and a lot of things happened that shouldn't have happened.
Well, let's go back. We had a son. We got married, and about a year later, we had our oldest son, Zachary. And then at the same time, we decided that we wanted to move to Colorado to follow some kind of warped dream that I had. And so I'll let Phil take it over from there.
We got into a lot of different things that we shouldn't have. For myself, after about 2 or 3 years, I was laid off, and it was really very tough, very devastating because I've been working 20 years, and I always had a job, always, and that really put a division between Sherry and I. I just didn't know how to handle it, and
he went into a state of depression, really, and out of all the hurt that I had from being separated from my parents and been reunited, and things that had happened over the years, had a lot of rejection, a lot of hurt, bitterness, anger, and it was pretty bad. So over the course of time, I left him with the children. And I thought, well, forget this, forget you, Phil, forget God, forget it. I'm out of here. So I started on my path of destruction. And it did not take long for me to get pretty much almost destroyed. The one turning point on this path of destruction was I had spent the night with a friend of mine, and the next morning we were sitting up, we were talking, And next thing I know, I woke up, and I couldn't talk. I hurt all over, and I looked at her, and I kind of mouthed, "What happened?" And she said, "You had a seizure, and we're going to the hospital right now." So she called Phil, and she dropped me off at the hospital. And so Phil came in the emergency room with me, and the doctor made a comment to me. He said, "Young lady, I don't know the life that you are living, but you can continue on the path you are, and you can die, or you can stop and you can live." And from that point on, I know now that was God, but I can tell you back then, I didn't know it was God, but I listened to those words of wisdom that came from that man, and it was I eventually I mean, just from that point, I stopped doing that lifestyle.
And you were sharing with me earlier, there were substance abuse problems that you had. Maybe you could tell a little bit about that, what was going on in your life.
I tried some drugs, and I couldn't get it, but so I started drinking. I forced myself to drink. And I forced myself to go out with the wrong people. Mm-hmm. I mean, because of the hurt, because of the abuse in me, the anger, the bitterness, that's what I did. I just turned to that instead of God. And if I turned to God, it definitely would have been a better situation, but I didn't. I got mad at God.
Mm-hmm. And through all this, even though I went to the hospital to help her, I'd already filed for divorce, and we followed it through all the way going to the court. And but my lawyer never showed up. And he would, for some reason, he was out of town, and when he was out of town, he got sick, and the divorce proceedings couldn't go through on that day.
He had emergency surgery. He was like 2 states over in emergency surgery, and the judge was going, where's your attorney? Where's your attorney? And so feels like, I don't know, he's supposed to be here. And the judge said, well, we're going to find out where he's at. And that's how we found out.
But so we're walking out of the courtroom together. Let me go back a little bit. I grew up as a Catholic, a very Catholic family. When I did meet Sherry, and I decided to marry her, God told me, He really spoke to me. He said, "Now, it's forever. It's a lifetime. It's you're not just going to marry her, for all these lustful reasons that you got in your head, and you're going to do this." And I it didn't come back to me till that time we were walking out of the courtroom that it was God that had talked to me about it, and that and we decided, we looked at each other and said, we've got to stop this. We've got to be together, and that's how we continued our marriage from that point.
Yeah, because the judge put a stay because his attorney didn't show up, and said, well, we'll give it a month. And so, like Phil said, he and I went out along with my attorney. My attorney went one way, and Phil and I went this other way. But like he said, we both heard the voice of God at that point. You're not going to get divorced. There is no way. You're not. And it was, I still did not move back home after that. It was about 3 months. And in that time frame, that gave God a chance, or me a chance to start walking with God. At the point I knew, I thought I was a Christian, but I wasn't. I just was not. But I found out that I had become an alcoholic, and I just left it. I mean, it was phenomenal. It just left. And all the old associations, I just left. I didn't look back. I mean, I didn't reach back to and wonder, oh, that would have been great. But no, it wasn't. You know, I think of where we lived, and I think this is the worst.
We after that we had our different jobs because I'd been laid off and I couldn't find work, and Sherry planned for a transfer back to Atlanta with her job. And then I got a job, and we were separated. She went to Atlanta, I stayed in Denver. I after about a year, then I went back to just moved back to Atlanta. And while we were there, Sherry was looking for a church. She had still had a lot of questions, still looking for a lot of answers. When we were in Colorado, she tried the Catholic Church. I didn't have the conviction as a Catholic to make somebody become Catholic, and so I let her investigate and choose the church and the way that she wanted to follow God. And she went to a lot of different churches, and I wasn't too sure, and she wasn't ever too sure. And because I was Catholic, I thought I was on my way to heaven and that I didn't need any help, and I was just trying to help my wife.
But you never went to church, even though you were a Catholic. You still didn't go to church, and I try to get him to come. There was a season, like you said, when I was really searching, and I just sat in my room one day and I said, God, there's got to be a better way of living than what I am doing. I mean, this is not working out for me whatsoever. And over a course of time, he said, call your sister. She knows some things, you know. I said, that's right. She doesn't remember because she used to be a church-going girl years ago. So I called her and I told her, I said, I'm sorry I haven't talked to you in 13 and a half years, but I have some questions. And she said, well, let me tell you, God's got a plan for your life and the devil's got a plan for your life. And the reason you are the way you are is because you've been following the devil's plan. And I said, you know what? That makes total sense. That makes just total sense to me. And she said, I know of some people over a course of time that are like 2 hours away that you can go to church. So Phil would drive us, my children and I, up to this church every Sunday, and he would drop us off. He would go down to the coffee house, have his own coffee. We'd have church. Then he'd come back and he would have fellowship with us, and then we would drive back home.
I love fellowship. I love breakfast too. But that was my pattern. I didn't need her church. I had my church. I was Catholic. I was on my way to heaven. But eventually, Sherry moved to. We all moved to Wilmington, and we went to the church there in Wilmington that was associated with the Word of Faith, and we went to the different weddings and the different seminars, and after a while, I quit going. The people were very friendly. I enjoyed the fellowship with all the ministers, Sherry continued going, and later on I started going back to some of the weddings and I told her, I said, you need to come to Spindale. You need to leave Wilmington, come to Spindale, and I'll find a way. It would transfer my job or whatever, and you need to move here. And that was like 2006, and she says, no, that's just not right. And I said, yes, and she didn't listen. And then about 2 years later, it came to her from God that she needed to move to Spindale, and I was all for it. We packed her up and moved her, and I stayed in Wilmington.
You stayed in Wilmington for a couple more years.
About 2 more years, and then God got to my heart. I would visit her occasionally, and then occasionally became regularly, and and just listening to what was going on in the church, and listening to the different ministers, God was changing my heart. Maybe this Catholic thing wasn't all what it's cracked up to be. But it was. I didn't have God in my heart. That was what was wrong. Just because I was Catholic, or you're of any kind of religion, doesn't mean you're going. You got the inside road to heaven. You've got to have that relationship with God yourself, and that's what I've learned at the Word of Faith. Even though I've only have been here in Spindale 8 years, I've learned that you've got to talk with God. You've got to be with God, and it's a daily thing. It's just not on Sundays, and it's. I've
praying has been key. Talking to God has been key. That's where I feel like we've learned a lot. When you talk to God, you know what He says. You can hear His voice, and He can tell you what you need to be doing or how you need to do something. Whether it's tying your shoe or mowing the yard or sewing a piece of garment together or styling your own hair or going next door to see if your neighbor needs anything, or if they're sick or not sick, just checking on them. I mean, it's the love of God that will tell you what to do, and it's not a syrupy thing. It's not a lustful thing. It's something that will endure forever when you have it in your heart, and it purges those hurts and those wounds that you gathered throughout your whole life. I mean, my uncle, when I was little, I used to tell him, "It hurts, Uncle Buddy. It just hurts." And he saw me probably about 10, 15 years ago, and he said, "Sherry, does it still hurt?" I said, "No, Uncle Buddy, it doesn't hurt anymore." I'm so grateful.
I'm helping in the prison ministry at the Word of Faith, and one of the passages that we learned, that I've learned at Word of Faith is 1 Corinthians 13, and 1 Corinthians 13 verse 6, and it says verse 7. Love bears up under anything, and everything that comes is ever ready to believe the best of every person. Its hopes are fadeless under all circumstances, and it endures everything without weakening. And I think that's, even though that's what's happening in my life, is learning to love, learning that it doesn't weaken. And when you're growing up, your parents tell you, you love them, and you say, "Well, how can you love me, that much?" But love doesn't weaken, and it's God that put it in your heart.
And no matter what goes on in your life, whether you're thinking that your husband doesn't love you, your children don't love you, what is the truth? And that is the main thing that I have seen, is that you've got to go to Jesus to find out what the truth is on a situation. When you're little and you started forming your own opinions of things, you find out those opinions aren't always true, and it takes finding out the truth so you don't have that hurt, so you don't walk around with all that pain in your heart. I mean, that has been the biggest key for me, going to Jesus. Jesus, what is truth in this matter? Is it this or is it that? And sometimes He'll tell me it's that, or sometimes He'll say, "No, it's neither of that, it's this." And it just breaks all that torment and misery that you're living in. And when you do that, it's just hearing His voice and having that love of God in your heart. That is so key. The other thing I really wanted to share was Ephesians 5:17, because when I started my journey with Jesus years ago, I was driving to work in Atlanta. It takes about an hour from where we lived, but he gave me a scripture, and it says, "Therefore, do not be vague and thoughtless and foolish, but understanding and firmly grasping what the will of the Lord is." Now, it seems like it might be easy, but if you don't ask him, you won't know. I mean, if you want to go someplace and you're just convinced it is Jesus, you better ask Jesus. You better ask those around you so they know, well, yeah, that sounds really good, but is it really good? I mean, we didn't ask our parents if we should have moved to Colorado. Not one lick. We just thought, well, this is a great idea. And in 6 short years, it about killed all of us. About all 4 of us.
And thank you so much. What a powerful testimony. It's amazing. I remember calling you the night we were talking about sharing your testimony, and I didn't know all this background, and I called you, and you said, well, we're sitting on our porch eating dinner, and I just had this picture of 2 couples that love each other, couple that loves each other so much, and then you begin to share with me how you were in divorce court. And how long have you guys been married now?
39 years.
39 years.
Yes.
And what a miracle. As an attorney practicing family law and divorce law, I don't think I've ever heard of a case where people walk out of the divorce court and get back together like that. And I'm just thinking how God so had his hand on both your lives. And here you are. Your marriage is restored. You would never know it. You love each other so much because it was God that put you together. You just didn't have God's love in your heart. You had to surrender to him. When you surrendered to him, that changed everything. That's what made the relationship work, was because both of you came into a relationship with Jesus. Yes. And when you did that, that's what makes the marriage work. Relationship with Jesus first. He puts his love in your heart for each other. You read 1 Corinthians, love bears up over everything. And then God can have a marriage that is designed by God with his love flowing through you.
Yes.
And God gave us an opportunity, Phil and I, to work together for a couple years. And we traveled every day, 6 days a week, 12, 15, 16 hours a day. And we took our Bible, and the first thing that we always, after we hopped in the car, we started reading 1 Corinthians 13. Every single day. Every day. And God worked it in our heart, and worked it in our heart, worked it in our heart. Well, things shifted, and so we're no longer working with each other on the road, but we still read 1 Corinthians 13 every day, just to keep it in our heart, just to keep in remembrance in our heart. This is how we were. This is where we're going.
That's great. And Phil, what you shared about, you can grow up in a church. You grew up Catholic. You actually stopped attending church for the most part, but you had a thinking of, oh, I'm Catholic and it's my way to heaven. Yes. Until you really started to understand that that's not how God has actually designed it, that we actually are supposed to have a relationship, a real relationship with him. The Bible talks about, Jesus said in John chapter 3, unless you're born again, you will never enter the kingdom of God. And Jesus lays out what born again means, and he talks about it even throughout John, about this surrender, this total surrender to him. Yes. Of your entire life. Yes. And this coming to him and having this personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And that's what you're sharing about. That's what you came to realize, was that it wasn't just a name. It wasn't just any it could be any denomination that Yes. You think of that you're part of, but it was coming to really know Jesus Christ and surrendering your entire life, Yes. Every single day to him, and saying, I want your will for my life. I want you to be Lord of my life. Yes. I want to walk with you every single day and surrender to you. And that is so precious that you shared that. And so we are out of time, and it was so good to share with you again. We are here Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 8:30 to 9. Our website is wordoffaithfellowship.org. If you want to go there, you can listen to other radio programs we have there. Hope